Hi, why don't you start by introducing yourself to us?
Hi, I'm Kaitlin Joshua. I'm a junior. I'm double majoring in economics and medicine, health, and society. I'm minoring in creative writing, and the piece that I submitted to the symposium is Love and Vera.
Great, thank you. Why don't you start by describing your writing process for us? So maybe how do you draft and revise a piece, or how do you know when a piece is done?
So my writing process is very organic, at least for fiction pieces. I sit down with an open page and basically start writing whatever comes to mind. It's basically a process of mining for what's actually good in there. I feel like I write a lot of fluff, so I'm just basically writing and writing and writing until I find a character that has a story that I'm ready to write about, really. And so my main character in this story, Natalie, she was a character before I even had a story for her. I kind of wrote her into being, and I was like, I think that she fits somewhere, but I don't know where she fits just yet. So it's really a process of just writing and writing and writing and writing and seeing what real comes out of it. Um, so I don't have a process where I just start doing this thing and then I have this idea. I mostly get my ideas just from thinking about a character and thinking about how they might reach the point that I want them to reach. So I have an idea of what kind of like personal development that I want them to have reached by the end, and I kind of think about the circumstances that would have led them to get to that point.
Mm.
So yeah, that's just really my fiction writing process. It's not so much formal, it's very organic and just kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and very character driven, it sounds like, as opposed to
Yes.
plot driven. Yeah, interesting. What about revising, especially revising a creative piece? It's kind of a different route than revising an analytical piece. How do you go about that?
So I just read my entire piece out loud. And that's just kind of how I get started. It helps to hear things out loud, especially for a fiction piece, because these characters are talking. These characters are moving. They exist in space, at least to me. So by just reading out loud, you kind of get a sense for how these characters might talk, how they might interact with each other. And so that really helps. And I basically just print my entire story out on double space and get a pen and start crossing out things and adding new things. Um, and I actually do approach it a little bit like I approach my academic writing, just very like systematically thinking about what could be better and like what I think about the plot and how I think the characters could express themselves better. So it's like when I'm thinking of the story itself, it's very, goes with the flow. But when I start editing, I kind of want it to be more rigid. I know what plot points I want to hit and how I want to hit them to make sure that the story makes sense. So I say when I'm revising, it's more about the technicalities as opposed to the plot. Whereas when I'm just drafting, it's just about all about the plot and the characters.
Hmm, interesting. And then how do you know when a piece is finished? I feel like especially with creative pieces, you could sort of, when do you know the story's over, right? Like, so how do you know when a piece is done for you?
So I don't know if my story's ever over. um, Even when I was like preparing to record my piece, I was like, I don't know if the story is over. Um, I think that I just come to a sense of completion, like the story as it is, I'm willing to share with someone,
Mm.
and I'll revise from there. But usually for me, a story is complete roughly when the character reaches like this point of realization within themselves. Of course, there's like the plot points, and you can really go on forever with plot points, but there has to be like this internal transition that is like a cycle that's come to an end. And at that point, I can end a story or move into another section of a story. So it takes some understanding of the character, and really understanding where that character is going by the end of the story. So when I feel like that character has like learned whatever lesson or been through whatever transition, that's when I feel comfortable ending a story.
Great. I like what you said about that you're ready to share it with someone else. I think that speaks for both analytical and creative writing, that when you come to a point where you can share it with someone, that's a step in the writing process that's really important.
Yes.
So you sort of already talked about this a little bit, but when writing, how do you select a topic, either for creative or analytical? You said that you think about your characters a lot, but that's not necessarily the topic of your writing. So how often do you approach that, selecting your topic?
I think that I just get a lot of my ideas from being out and observing. I really like to sit in coffee shops and take walks, and those are kind of the things that I do to relax and sometimes just to get my work done. So when I'm doing those things, I try to pay attention to what's going on around me. I might hear a fragment of a conversation or see like an interaction between a couple of people or just see something that reminds me of something I've read about or heard of. Um, and so I kind of use that to inform my process. I usually just keep like a running notes in my phone of like things that I've noticed or seen, and I basically apply it whenever I'm writing a story. I'll pull out my phone and see what I've written recently and see if anything kind of fits. So I start formulating characters, I feel like before that, but to inform their circumstances, I definitely use observations that I've had from pretty much everywhere I've been.
Interesting. I love that sort of art imitating life.
Yeah.
um, so at the writing studio, we've noticed that a lot of writers struggle with writing introductions and conclusions, no matter what piece of writing it is. So how do you handle those parts of a paper or of a creative piece?
Well, those are really difficult, and that's actually something that I had to learn in class last fall. One of the things that I've realized is that when you start writing, you just really might not necessarily know what the introduction is going to be. And so I've just kind of like accepted that, come to terms with it. So I just kind of start writing whenever I can, and I just kind of understand that like that introduction is probably not going to exist by the time that I'm done. Um, because I usually will find like a better place to start the story or something that's more indicative of what the character is about to go through or what the plot will be. So for me, writing introductions is particularly hard because it's hard to, be a marketer and get the reader's attention, but also have something that's going to be meaningful for the rest of the story. So that is difficult, but I found that changing where you start the story can be really important. Changing how you start the story, like with a piece of dialogue or something, can be important because I'm someone who really likes description. So I kind of had to learn to move away from that when it comes to the introduction because sometimes the reader can get lost in that. And it's important to get them roped in and get them invested in the character story first. Um, for conclusions, I think those come a little bit more naturally to me because I know kind of what I want the character to reach. I like to end with something. I like to end on a high note. I'm not really someone who writes like stories that end sadly. I really love rom-coms, so I don't think I'm used to sad endings. But I like to end with some kind of personal growth on the part of the character, something that people can identify with, and something that makes you feel like this person went through something, but they got through it, and I can get through it as well. So some kind of lesson is usually the end of my story, though I don't like it to be like super obvious that it's like a moral of the story, but something like that is usually how I end up my stories.
That's great. Yeah, I actually have a really similar process for writing introductions anyway. I sort of write something so I get started and then usually end up changing the whole thing. So I feel like that's probably pretty common for a lot of writers.
Yeah.
I did want to ask about your piece specifically. Who is your favorite character in the piece that you wrote?
Well, my favorite character, I would have to say, is Natalie. It is told through her point of view. And I feel like she was kind of a personal character. I hadn't gone through what she'd gone through, but I felt like she was a very realistic character and that she's using something else to deal with something that's very personal to her, the loss of her mother. So it's clear to me, at least throughout the story, that she's not quite dealt with that loss and that she's kind of replacing it with this other relationship that she can kind of invest a lot of time and energy thinking about. And so I would say that she's my favorite just because she seems characteristic of a lot of people. A lot of people, I feel like, use other things to kind of distract themselves from the really serious things that are going on in their lives. But I can't discount Miss Vera, who is just like this funny little woman.
Yeah, she was
And
nice.
so I think that she and Natalie are very like integral to each other's like, I don't know, character development, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love reading your piece, and Miss Vera was definitely my favorite. She's spicy. I like it.
Exactly.
But I just want to say thank you for for agreeing to this interview and for giving us kind of a window into your writing process. So
Yeah, thank you for having me.
thanks very much.